editor of Second Story Press, and I'm excited to welcome everyone to the online launch of Anne Lambert's new book, The Dogs of Winter, the second in the Russell and Leduc mystery series. You can buy the book on our website at secondstorypress.ca or from your favorite bookstore. Volume 1 in the series, The Birds That Stay, is also available from us. Unfortunately, Anne Lagacé-Dawson can't be with us tonight, but Anne Lambert will be in conversation with her daughter, the playwright Alice Abrason. Anne Lambert has been writing for stage and radio for 35 years. Her plays have been produced in Canada, the United States, Europe, and Australia. In Montreal, where she lives, she's worked with several theatre companies, most recently the Dawson College Theatre Collective. She recently retired from teaching at Dawson College after nearly 30 years and is currently the co-artistic director of Theatre West End. Anne is also the vice president of the Teresa Foundation, which supports children orphaned by AIDS and their grandmothers in Malawi. Her daughter, Alice Abrason, is a graduate of Harvard University and the National Theatre School of Canada. Her work has been produced in Canada, the United States, Chile, and South Africa. Her play, The Covenant, won the 2017 Canadian Jewish Playwriting Award. Her libretto, The Chair, was a co-winner of the inaugural Mercenat Musica Prix Trois Femmes. Her play, Sacrifice, was just performed at the Centaur Theatre as part of the Boca del Lupo Red Phone Project 2020. Welcome, Anne and Alice. Over to you.
Thank you, Jillian, for the wonderful introduction. I'm so excited to be here, and I'm thrilled to discuss this fantastic new mystery by Anne Lambert, playwright, teacher, novelist, and mother to two amazing, amazing children. Diving right in. I'm her daughter, for those of you who missed that, so that wasn't totally random. The Dogs of Winter is the sequel to The Birds That Stay, hailed by the Globe and Mail as one of 10 thrillers that will keep you on the edge of your seat. The Dogs of Winter begins after a howling snowstorm envelops Montreal and the body of a young woman is discovered in its wake. The only clue to her identity is the photograph in her pocket, and on it, the phone number of Detective Inspector Romeo Leduc. In this second thrilling installment of the Russell and Leduc mysteries, Marie, Russell, and Romeo are busy trying to navigate their jobs, families, and deepening relationship. Meanwhile, Marie is shaken when a student at her college is the victim of a terrible assault. Romeo begins to think that the death of the young woman carrying his photograph may be linked to violence against homeless people in the city. But the system fights him at every turn. While both Romeo and Marie confront the fact that justice may be impossible in a society blind to inequality and apathetic to change, a killer is stalking the frigid streets of Montreal, preying on its most vulnerable citizens. This evening, we have the chance to learn more about this exciting new novel from the author herself. We only have about 30 minutes, so let's dive right in.
Okay.
And would you like to read us an extract from The Birds That Stay? I'm so sorry, from The Dogs of Winter?
Yes, sure.
Fantastic.
It's hard to sort of take one thing out of a book, the one moment. So I thought it's probably best just to read the opening chapter, which I think sets certainly the tone of the snowstorm and the character of Montreal a little bit. So this is from The Dogs of Winter, chapter 1, and I can't find my glasses. Oh, wait, they're there. Hang on. Dogs of Winter, chapter 1. Saturday night, January 26, 2019. She knew it was stupid to go out in that storm. She knew it was dangerous. When Rosie Nukulik had first started out that afternoon, the city looked like the inside of the snow globe that she used to have, the kind that you could buy on St. Catherine Street at souvenir shops, the sparkly skyline of Montreal with two skaters twirling in a plastic circle. But now, that gentle snow globe winter had transformed itself into a howling wolf. The wind was blowing her sideways, and she struggled for traction on the narrow sidewalk. As she slid inside, the tunnel offered a blessed reprieve, and she briefly considered hiding there until the worst of it was over. She'd also lost one of her cherished mittens, the sealskin ones her Anna had made for her when she turned 12. She couldn't feel her fingers at all anymore, so she tucked her right hand inside her jacket and then squeezed it under her armpit in the hopes of restoring sensation. She'd had frostbite last winter, when one fingertip had to be amputated from her left hand. She stopped to catch her breath. He said he would meet her in the bus shelter on the other side of the tunnel. He promised. But now she realized he wouldn't be there, not in this. Rosie knew she couldn't stay in the tunnel and continued carefully along, palming the wall with her covered left hand for guidance. Her right hand held her coat tightly to protect him as much as she could. As she emerged from the shelter of the tunnel, shards of icy snow cut into her face and a blast of wind almost blew her off her feet. The storm was so powerful now that almost everything was obliterated. She'd never seen that in the city before. There was no skyline, no trees, no cars. She remembered those whiteouts at home, where in seconds you couldn't know which way you were heading. You didn't even know if you were up or down. Her uncle died in one of those, trying to get her baby cousin home after a party. The baby had somehow been found alive, but no one could imagine how. Her Anna said it was his spirit animal who had carried him back to safety. Rosie leaned back into the tunnel and watched as the waves of snow tumbled overhead. She and Maggie had dreamed of having a big house in the city where they and all their friends could live, where they could eat country food all day, and she would play the piano for them, singing all their favorite tunes. He had promised her a piano. She looked back into the tunnel behind her, but could see nothing. It had become like the black bottom of the bay in early winter. She tucked her face deeper into her jacket and pulled the bits of scarf over her head tighter, but her right hand felt frozen like a stone. She peeked into her coat. Amazingly, he was still asleep. She stepped over the rail to make a run for it, but her feet skidded out from under her. She struggled to one knee, using her free, frozen hand for purchase in the snowdrift. Suddenly, a light appeared through the tunnel like a phantom, like a revenant. She got unsteadily to her feet and tried to run. He had promised her. He had promised her. So that's the end of chapter 1.
Fantastic, Anne. Thank you. That was the first chapter of Anne Lambert's new mystery novel, The Dogs of Winter. Today we have the chance to learn more about the author herself and the new work. I'm excited to spark a conversation, but for the audience members who are watching online, if you have additional questions, please put them in the chat, whether on YouTube or on Facebook Live, and we'll come to them at the end of our interview. So Anne, what was your impetus or inspiration for writing this book?
Well, I was just thinking about that again this afternoon because it came to me in different bits and pieces. So one was that I was asked to write a sequel to The Birds That Stay featuring the same main characters, Romeo Leduc, the chief inspector for homicide in Saint Jerome, and Marie Russell, his, well, now girlfriend, and a marine biology professor at Dawson College. So I knew there were a couple of ideas I wanted to explore. One was the idea of the homeless in and around Dawson College and the situation of the homeless people that I encounter every day for many, many years, and how it was that they came to find themselves there, and how we as a society kind of tolerate these kind of living conditions for people. How is it that we turn a blind eye to that, or at least feel like we are somehow complicit in it? I also wanted to, and that led me to sort of an examination of how, of some of the situation of the homeless in Montreal, and then how Inuit people in particular, who comprise quite a few of the homeless in that particular part of Montreal, how they came to be there and what were the circumstances that brought them there. And of course, that led me to investigate, well, a lot of things, but the systemic racism that we see that is just everywhere in this country, and certainly in Montreal. And so Romeo and Marie gave me a way into that. What happens is Romeo's phone number is found in a dead woman's pocket, and he's brought into Montreal by the Montreal police to as a kind of witness. And then he sort of is forced to sort of conduct his own inquiry into what happened. So there was that, but it was also not just systemic racism, but our own complicity in that, our own this kind of casual personal racism that I think we engage in. And also, in the book I describe it as Marie Russell's gauntlet of guilt, when she has to kind of cross to get her $5 Starbucks before her class, and she has to cross many homeless people on the way there. And in the old days, she used to give them money, and now she doesn't do that so much anymore. And sort of the sense of paralysis,
Apathy.
yeah, but her own sort of
more inertia.
her own helplessness and not knowing what to do, and the situation feels so big. And so I wanted to look at that as well. I also wanted to put a woman, because the novel begins with the voices of 4 very different women, different in age, ethnicity, culture, background, etc. I wanted to have another female character who was whose life was going really great, and then she makes just something happens, and while she's driving her car home in a snowstorm, and she is suddenly forced to make a choice, and she doesn't make a very good one, and she has to live with those consequences. I like putting ordinary people in kind of extreme circumstances. And finally, I know this is a long answer. Finally, I was really interested in looking at gendered violence especially against women, which sort of feeds, of course, into the situation of many of the homeless women, in particular in Montreal. And so I got the idea inspired by a real person that I love very much, that the star student of Marie is the victim of a terrible assault. And Marie has to kind of respond to that situation.
Yeah.
I know.
And so having, no, it's good. It's a good, great answer.
A laugh, Ryan.
But the book does contain humor. The book is not without humor.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so having found those inspirations, what next steps did you take? What was the research that you undertook to write this book?
Okay, so I left out something pretty important, actually, and that is, while I was doing all this, looking into these sort of different issues that interested me, and that I felt quite compelled by, and I had to do quite a bit of research, newspapers and online, obviously, and read quite a few books and observed, and also just kind of being alive for 63 years, you learn a thing or two. I was also, while I was researching this, the story popped up in the Gazette about these 2 young Inuit women. They were not homeless women, but they had both died within, I think, 2 weeks of each other in the fall of 2017. And both were considered suspicious deaths, but both were deemed suicides. And it was clear to me, and it was clear in this article, that the Montreal police were not going to pursue the investigation into these deaths any further. And these young women were the exact same age as you at the time. They were 27. And it felt like a sign. It was just like, it was horrifying to me that these women, and I read as much about them as I could find. There wasn't actually that much about them available, but that they had experienced this, and that they had died like that. And our own police force was not willing to look further into their deaths. And then, of course, I discovered that this was common. And it just, the thought that, you had the opportunity to live this life that you have, and they weren't, just by sheer bad luck, and it just seemed absolutely wrong. So I wanted to look at that as well. And the book does look at that issue as well.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you say bad luck, but as the book examines, it's a lot more than bad luck. It's decades and decades of the perpetration of systemic injustice. And one thing that was quite interesting to me, moving from The Birds That Stay to The Dogs of Winter, where The Birds That Stay is looking at a historical injustice and the ghosts of that coming to light in the present day. The Dogs of Winter tackles head-on a lot more pervasive injustice that we see, and that it remains around us, and turns a real lens on the continued failure of institutions and governments and individuals, including in some cases Romeo and Marie.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, so, The Birds That Stay looked at another historical injustice and a lot of other things as well. But, essentially The Birds That Stay was really, in terms of both the sort of personal stories in that book and the broader political backdrop that the book is set against, like The Dogs of Winter as well, it's really about what happens when truth is not acknowledged and not told. It's the consequences. It's the terrible consequences that happen when we do not acknowledge and tell the truth, both personally and politically in a broader context. And so The Dogs of Winter is the same story in that sense. It's looking at these terrible crimes really that have been perpetrated by successive governments and by against people in the Indigenous and specifically Inuit people in this country, but also against people who find themselves homeless. The economic injustice of that, and I know that I was really interested, especially through Marie and Romeo's characters. I shouldn't make that assumption. I know a lot of us live with that same dilemma, that same moral dilemma. We are those of us who are comfortable and do reasonably well and, have a shelter and are able to eat properly every day. We live with the knowledge that there's so many people in the world that don't have that, not only across an ocean, but in our own city. And, we have to navigate that kind of moral dilemma daily, and I think it does erode the soul. I think it does have an effect on us. And so I wanted to look at that too.
Yeah. And that interrogation that the two of them go through and that several of the other characters go through is especially interesting. Also, what you said about, how this is something that there's economic injustice that's also explored through the book. When you bring in their gendered violence as well, there's a lot of different intersections of injustice that the book investigates. And you say when it's about the trauma that's caused when truth is not acknowledged. It's also when truth is acknowledged but deliberately ignored.
Yeah, well, there's that too. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, and I thought what was kind of interesting for me, sort of making this kind of inquiry through the characters of Romeo and Marie. I mean, Romeo comes to Montreal. He's by no means naive, but he comes into Montreal as part of this inquiry and discovers, that the police in Montreal, and I don't want to paint all police like that, but we're talking about systemic racism here, are just not interested in these issues. And Marie, it sort of does her own investigation as well. I can't give too much away, but and so she, it's a huge learning curve for both of them. And then there's a huge learning curve between the two of them in terms also of the kind of the other idea of sort of sexual violence against women and the Me Too movement that, sort of comes into play in this book as well. And I can think of a particular discussion they have that between the two of them that, I hope readers will recognize and appreciate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, there's an interesting dialogue there. There's interesting tensions that get raised in this novel. And also one thing I really love about this is that this is not the story of two people on a crusade to save the world from systemic injustice. One thing we see is that the work is continuing and also that it very much is a collective effort. And so there's a lot of really fascinating new characters who we're seeing in The Dogs of Winter, some of whom are returning favorites from the Birds That Stay, and some of whom are new faces entirely. Is there anyone in particular who was the most challenging for you to write or the most fun to write, whether returning or new?
Oh, that's such a good question. I was thinking, we sort of talked about this a little earlier, but then of course I changed everything I was going to say.
How was it revisiting Marie and Romeo?
Well, that's right. So it was kind of an interesting experience, and I'm sure there's writers watching this. And so every time I got to a Romeo, because each chapter is from a different point of view of each character, and there's quite a few characters in this book. There's I don't know, 14 or 15 or something. But but every time I got to a Romeo or Marie chapter, I felt this relief because I thought, oh, good, I know these people. But then also this pressure, because as I think I mentioned to anybody who's asked me about The Birds That Stay, I feel like I put everything in that book. Like I didn't know I was writing a series. So I just loaded everything into The Birds That Stay that I could think of. So then suddenly I had to create all this like more backstory, and which was fine, but it was always, that was fine. The challenging character, I would say, was probably Rosie Nukulik, the one that I read in the first chapter. The carryover of Tikkun Kuzuno from Birds That Stay was really fun because he's become a very popular character, which I find amusing. I think the ones obviously that were furthest from my own experience. So the ones, Nia Fellows and Christian Bork, the ones who are homeless, and those are always require more research that's outside of my personal lived experience. So those are more challenging. But in a way, in some ways, sustaining Romeo and Marie might have been the most challenging.
And how was that? Just the consistency of them, finding
Well,
new root in their relationship?
how was that? I don't know, just that I have to keep those plates spinning and I have to keep that relationship going in ways that I hope readers enjoy and appreciate, and then manage to get this plot going with all these other storylines, because there's several, right? Interestingly, in some ways, probably no, I don't want to say that. Never mind. I'll take that back. I was going to.
Spoilers. Anyway.
Well, no, I'm not, because that is a spoiler. Sorry,
Yeah,
can't do that. Can't talk about that. Forget it.
I'm the spoiler police here. I'm keeping an eye out. And when it came from moving to your first novel to your second novel, is there anything that they just kind of click into place? Like, oh, I get this. I don't know, something that you were struggling with from carrying over from theater, or?
Oh, that's a good question. I think this one was a little easier. I probably shouldn't say that, but I felt really clear in this book where it was headed once I had because there's really 3 stories going on in this, 4 maybe. So once I had those, it was pretty easy to move from chapter to chapter, to be honest. Like, in retrospect now, compared to The Birds That Stay, because The Birds That Stay also took me down this other rabbit hole of, Nazi war criminals in Canada that was not part of the original plot, which I know sounds kind of amazing.
Spoilers.
Yeah, but I think most people here maybe have read The Birds That Stay. And in this book, so I was, when I was a playwright, 2 people would say, "Oh, don't you just sort of start your book and then you just kind of wander down the path and your characters, take on a life of their own?" And for sure they do. Of course, they take on a life of their own. I don't plot every single thing that happens, but I do have to know where my book's going. If you know me, when you're in a car with me, I have to know where I'm going. I don't like not knowing, having a map, and of course that's so archaic now, but knowing where we're going.
You like having me look up Google Maps.
Well, when we used to use maps, I liked having a map on my lap. I was the family navigator, and I still am. I just like to know where I'm headed, because so I usually have the last scene in my head at the very least. And then, of course, the book, the characters will take me on when I do some research or I sort of dig into their emotional landscape. Very often I'm taking on, down a different trail.
And lingering in this question of the writing process itself, what's the best writing advice you've ever received, or the worst? And the worst.
Well, I think the best writing advice I ever received, in terms of actually writing, which I think is, the key, is give yourself permission to write. Judy Curnew told me that, who's a playwright 100 years ago in a workshop at Playwrights Workshop in Montreal. And I know it seems so simple, but I remember just thinking, oh, okay. So I just started writing. I wrote Very Heaven, the play, after that. I read something recently, and I think it really applies to this book. And, I know people keep saying, write what you know, write what you know. You always write what you know, because all books are to some degree autobiographical. They all are. But I really like to write about things, and I think this is consistent my whole career as a playwright as well, about what I don't know and what I want to understand. That's what I like to write about, because I don't see, like, I have to write about something like that. So with this book, I wanted to understand, I wanted to look at the idea of of these powerful men who get away with terrible violence against women. I wanted to look at this tolerance of this racism and economic injustice of homelessness, and especially with Inuit people. I wanted to understand it, and my way has always been to fictionalize it, and then create characters that allow me to sort of get into those questions. So that's, yeah. Did I answer your question?
You did. Thank you. So you're grappling with these large questions in your novel. What do you yourself look for in a mystery novel? Yeah.
Oh, I really like when I don't know what's going to happen. So right out of the gate,
Really?
well, because I read a lot of mystery novels and I know what's going to
A
happen.
mystery.
I know who the killer is, right? Or I'm disappointed by an unearned ending. You know, I think The Birds That Stay, and I hope with Dogs of Winter, I think the endings are earned. I think I don't parachute something in. I think the clues are all there. I like having clues left for me. I like more complex, more nuanced characters. I don't like it very black and white. I don't like cliches. I don't, and I like characters who are really grappling with issues that I think a lot of us can relate to, and who are really caught. You know, who are essentially trying to be decent, good people, and you know, forces conspire against them, and their own terribly flawed natures make that not happen.
And what do you want people to find in your mystery book?
All that.
All that. Fair enough.
Well, I mean, yeah, yeah, I think so. I hope that they, you know, these are murder mysteries, so I hope people really want to turn the page, and I think most people do. I think they want to come away feeling like maybe they've experienced something that they wouldn't have otherwise, you know, that they understand something a little more deeply, that they were entertained. You know, as you know, I'm an amateur natural historian, so, and I just think it's very funny. Nobody can see this, but my computer is resting on The Birds of North America and Moby Dick. Those are two books holding my computer up. Anyway, that's pretty me.
And did you consult those for research? Any
Oh, yeah.
interesting research experiences as you were writing this?
Yes, for sure. Researching the history of Nunavik in northern Quebec, the Inuit territory in northern Quebec, I learned things that I did not know. Like, I just scratched the surface. There's so much I don't know. I wish every single Canadian kid could have a history primer written by an Indigenous person in their schools. I wish we were all more exposed to that. There's actually not that much information out there.
Or not accessible to
Well,
us young students yet?
yeah, it's just, you know, you have to really search for it. And that was a huge door opening for me, and one I plan to walk through and continue studying for the rest of my life. You know, I had to do the usual murder mystery things, like what happens when, you know, how to strangle someone, and what happens when a car hits a person at a certain speed.
So you're on a couple of watch lists.
I am.
Okay.
But I also went on anyway, I'll tell that. Never mind. I think we're running out of time, so I won't tell that one. But yeah, so, you know, it's just what, you know, martial art does the Israeli Defense Forces practice. I wanted one of my characters to be able to do that. And so I looked that up, and that was a whole afternoon of, that's quite interesting. So, you know, that's one of the very fun things about writing books like these, is that you get to do what I love to do, which is just have, you know, a vast, or I shouldn't say vast knowledge. I should say a very eclectic knowledge about a lot of things, but not very deep knowledge.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And well, you're deepening that knowledge as we speak. We've got a couple of questions from the audience that I might pass your way.
Okay.
How have you found the pandemic has been for your writing? Has it been inspiring creatively, or has it been more difficult than other times to create?
Oh, I haven't really done much writing, so I guess not. I haven't done that much writing since the pandemic, since COVID hit. Why? Because I was just sort of finishing The Dogs of Winter, and so I didn't feel overly motivated to write. But I have been working quite a bit on book number 3 in the last few weeks, so I guess that's passed. I did do a couple little writing workshops too with Toronto Writers Collective. That was, and all I could write about was COVID. Like we weren't necessarily supposed to, but that's all I wanted to write about. And so I don't know that it's done. You know, I'm pretty distracted, I think, a lot of the time, and so I don't know. I think it's kind of been the same. You know, if I have a deadline, I'll write. I'm just like that.
So we need to give you a deadline.
Yes. Always had, and then I go and miss it because I've never made a deadline in my life either.
Fair. And I know you've been you say you've been more focused on the post publication of the Dogs of Winter, but you have been recording audiobooks
Oh yeah,
for the Dogs of Winter. So how's that experience been?
Well, I just recorded the 2 books. Oh, wait, that's what I did during COVID. I recorded both the birds. I forgot the title.
The Birds of Winter and the Dogs that Stay.
The Dogs That Stay and the Birds of Winter. Oh, I had a ball. I had so much fun. I worked with Diane Roberts, who I love, and Simon. Oh my, I just forgot his last name. Petrakis. And I just had a ball. There's no, I'm not an actor, but I loved voicing these characters. I think it went pretty well. I would happily start another career as a voice actor, but certain people tell me that it takes a long time to get through the union. And
I said, make a demo.
Okay. Is there another question?
Yeah, we do. We have a question from Sue Phillips. Will book 3 also be in the Montreal vicinity?
No. So book 1's in the Laurentians, as those of you who read the book know, mostly takes place in the Laurentians in St. Lucie, where I happen to be right now with my dog Lucy on the little sofa across from me. The second book, I wanted to get out of the Laurentians because I'm not a big fan of lots of murders happening in one little town. So I know that's completely acceptable in the murder mystery genre, but I'm not a big fan of that. So I moved the setting to Montreal because, as I said earlier, I wanted to look at some of these questions that I really wanted to explore, and that required Montreal. The next book is back up in St. Lucie for the most part, back up in the Laurentians for the most part. Yeah, I'm coming back up here. And this next book is set in the summer.
So we're moving through the seasons.
We're moving through the seasons. So that'll be really nice to write because I'll be writing it now through the winter and I'll be imagining the summer.
The Birds of Summer. The Dogs of Summer.
It involves whales, the next one, a lot. So
The Whales of Summer?
I don't think so, but thank you. So is there another question we should look at, or?
Let me take a look. I think we're good. Well, we might head towards our conclusion. I'll say thank you so much, Anne, for answering all these questions. If anyone else has any further questions, please post on our Facebook. I'll keep an eye for another minute. But if not, that brings us to the close of this evening. I'd recommend folks to go out right now, get yourself the Dogs of Winter. If you want to know what happens first, check out The Birds That Stay before moving to the Dogs of Winter. Sorry, I'm struggling with my camera here.
Can I just say something? You can read the books out of order. They're both The Dogs of Winter is a self-contained book. So certainly you don't have to read The Birds That Stay first. But I would say for a more complete experience, that's probably better. And if you don't like reading, buy the audiobooks because they're both out and I think they're pretty good.
There you go.
I do say so myself.
Okay. Anne Lambert and Alice Abrason, thank you so much. We really enjoyed your conversation. And Anne's books are available on secondstorypress.ca. That's The Dogs of Winter and The Birds That Stay, or from your favorite independent bookshop. Thank you very much. Good night, everybody.
Thank you, Second Story Press. Thank you, Jillian, and thank you, Alice, my darling.
Thank you, Anne.
Okay. Bye, everybody. Good night.
Bye, everyone.